Good evening, friends. Welcome to this brand new series, The Covenants of Bible. And I stumbled across this subject of covenants nearly a decade ago and wondered what this is. What is this covenant? And uh, and I did started doing a research into what is this word covenant? What does it mean? So I took some time, few months, and go through every instance where the word covenant occurs and underlying Greek word and underlying Hebrew word. And I went through all of them, and it was very, very surprising. And then I did more study over the years, and only only response that I see every time I study this subject is shock. Why was I shocked? Because it was so much concealed, so much hidden, and uh, and this is very important subject for God and in God's mind. But yet, I see the demons and demonic spirits. They work hard and try to cover up this subject, and I found myself was so much deceived not even to address this subject, not even recognize that there is a thing called covenant and how much God works through covenants. And there is no serious relationship with God and anybody without a covenant. It's so paramount in its importance. And yet, I was so ignorant of this vital concept. And now I want to make a beginning of this journey of covenants. And Don Wales asked me to start this series. It's almost like a crash course. We are going to do a compressed series of the covenants so that we are prepared for the Passover. Because at the Passover, Yeshua, Jesus, Son of God, offered a cup of wine to the disciples who are sitting with him, and he said, "This is my blood shed for you under the new covenant." I know we take the Passover for several years. Some of you probably 20 years, 30 years, 40, 50 years, and probably more likely you never thought, never gave serious consideration. Why is he offering this wine as a symbol of his blood that is shed under the new covenant? What is, after all, the new covenant? And there are many false notions, false concepts, false teachings, and cover up for the new covenant. And that is, I'm planning and I'm working hard and praying so that we can break misconceptions, and the lies that were circulated to cover up this subject. Now, what I found that I needed to benefit from this subject as I studied for several years, two basic things I needed. One is brutal honesty, and second is ruthless truthfulness. Truth and truth only. I don't care what I believed for so many years. If God shows me in His Word, I would stand by the Word of God, not by any other opinions or ideas of men that I was brainwashed with for so long. It doesn't matter if I was deceived for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, but I should be willing to reconsider my long held opinions about the covenants. With that introduction, let's launch into the presentation. I deliberately chose this picture on the left hand side. You see that it's a marriage covenant. Marriage is always a covenant in Bible, and marriage is the building block of the covenant that God makes with anybody, especially people. When he calls them my people, it's always a marriage behind the scenes. Now, as you can see, the groom and bride, they were joyfully brought together and they're entering into agreement. And perhaps you have all the vows of marriage covenant. They were written and they sign. The man and his would-be wife both would sign, and then they would be declared man and wife, husband and wife. Now I pronounce you as husband and wife. It's a contract. The covenant is a contract. They agree to the terms and conditions of the contract, and there are parties to the covenant. And this covenant, once it is signed and agreed, it is sealed. It is sealed. So the covenant comes into effect once both of them sign, and the authority that officiate the marriage would declare them husband and wife. Then the marriage kicks in and starts. They begin their beautiful marital journey. Hereafter, they were pronounced wife and husband. So their marriage covenantal journey begins with a new relationship, and this relationship grows and blossoms with greater intimacy, greater sharing. Even though they come from different homes, different backgrounds, different personalities, different likes and dislikes, there are so many differences, but they begin to work together in this beautiful marriage covenantal relationship. So this is the background, and we would come back and often come back to marriage. And the covenants are exclusive. The exclusivity is to the parties that are involved. Now, here you see a man, a young man, and his beautiful bride. They're signing this covenant agreement. And now, once the covenant is officiated and they're pronounced wife and husband, and their marriage begins, now I cannot go and claim to be part of that covenant. That is foolish and stupid and illegal for me to join that covenant because I was not a party to that covenant. Or I can sit in my home and think about this covenant, and I would obey the terms and conditions of that covenant. Whatever they wrote and agreed, I cannot myself associate with that covenant, the marriage covenant between that man and that woman, that girl. Because I am no way connected to that covenant somebody else made. So there should be clearly written in the agreement who are the parties, a man's name and the wife to be, the bride's name, clearly written with their full names, last names, first names, middle names, and any alias names. All of them would go into the marriage certificate, isn't it? To make sure somebody else cannot come and claim to be that man or to be that girl. So that is exclusive to the parties. And the terms and conditions they agreed would apply only to those two persons, not to us, not to me, not to anybody. So these things we have to keep it in mind. Every covenant is exclusive to the parties, and the terms and conditions apply to only those parties, and the parties would be bound to the terms that are agreed for the rest of their married life, for the rest of the covenanted life. But the marriage covenant can end, even though it is very sad and the marriage has to come. The marriage can come to an end with a divorce. But divorce doesn't necessarily means that it is all done. But the more important thing that God comes up with the proper termination of the marriage covenant is death of one of the parties. Either the man dies, then the woman is freed from the marriage covenant, or the wife dies and the man is freed from the covenant. Then they can go, and if they choose to get married, they can get married to another person. But until death do us part from this marriage covenant, that is the idea, that is the theme conveyed. It meant to be eternal in the sense it is forever, in the sense until your last breath. This has to be upheld. This beautiful covenant has to be upheld. Now, when we come to covenants between God and men, God assumes automatically a role of husband, and the people that he enters into covenant, they become the bride, the wife. That is the nomenclature Bible uses from cover to cover for those covenants that are executed between God and man, or men, we can say. So this is the covenant, and it is vital for you to understand the covenant, each of the covenants that we find in Bible, and who are the parties. Am I the party to the covenant? Can I legally abide in that covenant or not? That is the first due diligence you have to do. And second thing is that covenant still active, still in force? That is another thing. And if one of the persons died in this marriage and the covenant comes to an end, one of the parties to the covenant dies, that's how the covenant comes to an end. Then she cannot claim technically to be part of that covenant, because covenant has come to end. You cannot now force herself, she cannot force herself claim to be in the marriage covenant with the dead husband. Everybody has to be alive for that covenant to be enjoyed. And what are the benefits? There are some benefits and some penalties. The benefits would be long-term relationship, and the husband cares and provides and protects his wife, and the wife would respect the husband and be his helpmate and helps in every way to enrich the husband and beautifies him as much as he beautifies her and takes tender care of her. This is the beauty of the marriage covenant. Now, covenants are not always between God and man. There are several covenants we find between man and man, between men and men, between two tribes, between two kings, between two kingdoms, between two enemies, and between two friends. This is, God gives us a wide variety of covenants so that we begin to grasp the concept of covenant. So I want to take you through the covenants with one sample scripture for each of the type of the covenant. When we are talking about man and man, between man and man, we have between two friends, between two enemies, and when we come to specialized covenants, that man sometimes makes a covenant with himself. Isn't it interesting? Self-covenant. And another category, interesting category, is man can go and have a covenant with death and with hell. What is that? It's a more figurative way of saying that you are aligned and tied up yourself to death and the demons and devil. And there is also a covenant between God and man. God and man, that is the area of interest for us in this series. Even though in this introductory presentation, I will walk through different covenants, different types, and one example for each. But going forward, we would be focusing only on those covenants that God and man were brought together. So let's launch in the presentation. Etymology, the words, Hebrew word and Greek word for a covenant. And then goal of this series for us to help us better understand Passover and New Covenant. How New Covenant is tied up to Passover. What is all about New Covenant? That is the end of this series, but we would begin a few scriptures that where Son of God offered his blood under New Covenant to the disciples. And God is God of covenants. God is God of covenants and different types of covenants. And main presentation, we will go through Noahic covenant, Genesis 8, verse 20 to Genesis 9, verse 17. God here is a God of covenants. When God makes covenants or covenant with people, he has in mind certain clear things. The clear things from God's point of view when he makes covenant with people is God is not available on demand. What I mean by on demand is when you feel like there is a need for God, you come and pray and be right with God. And when you don't have need, you don't bother about God at all. You forget about God. It's a need basis, on demand availability of God that man wishes. That means it's a very random relationship that man wants with God. And God completely eliminates that kind of random behavior via the covenants. When he makes a covenant, he wants a serious relationship, a continual relationship, a consistent relationship, a meaningful relationship, a deep relationship. The relationship has to be defined and has to be executed. It's a legal document that God provides where the terms and conditions are clearly laid out so that there is no confusion, and then the parties have to abide. And when God makes a covenant, God comes up with the terms and conditions, not the man. And all the terms and conditions somehow denote us, tell us the benefits and the blessings that come out of the covenant when we are faithful to the covenant. And the penalties and the curses and the punishments that would come out of unfaithfulness to the covenant. So there is a faithfulness to the covenant and unfaithfulness to the covenant. Both would be addressed and clearly laid down in that legal document we call contract or covenant. And then God and the people that are coming into the covenantal relationship, they agree. Once the document is presented, both the parties would agree. God would say yes. And of course, it is a yes implied because God is presenting these terms and conditions. So God is implicitly saying yes. The people who are becoming part of this covenant, they also should agree. I accept these covenantal terms and conditions. Just like in marriage, the girl would say, I do. So once they agree, and there would be a blood, always there is a blood to seal the covenant, to freeze the terms and conditions of the covenant. The terms and conditions also include the parties, God, as well as which people, which specific people are involved in this covenant. They also are mentioned in the document. And then once the blood is used to seal and ratify the covenant, covenant comes into effect. Once the covenant comes into effect, nothing can be changed to the terms and conditions of the covenant. That's very important for us to understand. Neither God adds anything or nor removes anything from the terms and conditions. They are frozen forever for the life of that covenant. And he would not allow man and any other parties to change the terms and conditions. The, but the covenant, when it comes to an end, most likely one of the parties die. The covenant comes to an end, and then that covenant is no longer available, no longer in force. Until it is in force, all the parties that are parties to that covenant are binding in the terms and demands of that covenant. So it is binding. If somebody is not faithful to the covenant, the penalties that are mentioned would be inflicted by God. But if somebody is faithful, the blessings would flow out. That is the technicality of the covenant. And then we would see God is God of covenants. Throughout the series, we would see God is God of covenants. Any meaningful relationship that you can have with God is only via covenant. You can have a natural relationship between creator and created beings. The created beings, for them, he is God. And for God, you are his created beings. There's a natural relationship. You can always approach God and pray and appreciate. You give thanks. But that is outside of the covenant. That is a random relationship. But a consistent, continuous, meaningful, well defined relationship comes into existence only via the covenants. Are you seeing the reason why God comes up with this method of relating himself to his people? The covenant is so vital, and each covenant he makes is different from the other covenants that he makes with other people. So if God made a covenant with Russians, that is with him and Russians. Now, Americans can't go there and claim to be part of that covenant. This is very essential that we understand the covenants and be knowledgeable. Now, one of the goals of this series is to improve your knowledge of the covenant, each of the covenants, so that you make an educated decisions regarding which covenant you would be abiding. And then main presentation, Noahic covenant. Noahic covenant is God makes this covenant with entire mankind when plus with other parties immediately after the flood of Noah. So it is between God and Noah and all his seed. That's where we get this name, Noahic covenant. So let's see the etymology. The berith. Berith is the Hebrew word consistently used throughout the Old Testament. And berith is covenant, alliance, or a pledge. Berith has a root meaning of cutting, cutting a covenant, cutting an agreement, cutting a league. It's cutting a pledge, cutting an alliance. All these things are some way we can paraphrase as a binding relationship. Here it's a relationship, and the behavior and relationship is bound with some terms and conditions. That is the idea of berith. And then that is between men. This is dictionary definition. Between men, it is treaty, alliance, league. It could be between two kings, two kingdoms, and two enemy nations, or two groups of people. It can be any groups. For example, United Church of God and Kagwa can make an alliance and come together, even though that's not going to happen in any near future. It can be between two groups. And it also has a meaning of constitution in a sense that is terms and conditions, all the legality of this covenant and the ordinance. And sometimes a king can make with his subjects a covenant, a constitution, an ordinance. These all carry the meaning of berith, the covenant. And it's an agreement and a pledge. Pledge is more like somebody voluntarily upholds the terms and conditions of the agreement. You're pledging your allegiance. There is an oath also. There's a swearing also behind the covenants, most of the covenants. And then there is alliance of friendship, or two parties are brought together, brought closer to each other, nearer to each other. So sometimes it's a very intimate relationship that begins in a small way, then blossoms. Then alliance of friendship, alliance of marriage. And then we have second category of berith between God and man. It is also an alliance of friendship. God would be friendly to certain people based on terms and conditions. And the covenant, this is divine ordinance with signs or pledges. This is more relevant to our study. And then you have interesting phrases, even the dictionary gives. The covenant making, how a covenant made, when was it made, by whom it was made, and what is the sign of that covenant, what are the penalties, what are the blessings. All these things would carry the covenant making. And the blood, how blood is shed and how blood is used to seal the covenant and ratify the covenant, whose blood is used. That's an important thing. And covenant keeping, being faithful to the covenant, to uphold the covenant, to remain faithful to the covenant. And then covenant violation. What are the penalties? What are the dangers? And then I think they should also add another point, how the covenant comes to an end. The covenant between man and man, when they enter into a contract between two people, when they agree to their terms and conditions of a contract, the document would be valid, and a copy of the document is kept with both the parties. This is man to man covenants. And then finally, in ancient world, when the covenant is no longer required or no longer valid or no longer in force, and both the parties agree to break this covenant, then what typically they do is they come to a public office or a public notice board. They take this document and drive a nail through that document and affix the whole thing with a nail to the wall. Then everybody would know that covenant is no longer in operation, no longer in force, because it is nailed. This is very important because Bible uses all this ancient terminology, the ancient practices of the covenants or contracts. The next word is diatheke in Greek. This is important. A disposition, arrangement of any sort, which one wishes to be a valid, the last disposition which one makes of his earthly possessions after his death, a testament or a will. So the Greek word can also cover the testament or will, and as well as covenant, because entire Old Testament, which was translated into Greek in Septuagint, the berith, the Hebrew word, is always translated as diatheke consistently. So we understand with Greek Old Testament, diatheke must first refer to a covenant and then also a testament or will. We will talk about this difference a little bit later. A compact, a covenant, and a testament. And God's covenant with Noah, etc., they were all covered by the word diatheke. And the whole reason Don Wales asked, as he mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we want to understand why Passover is linked to New Covenant. Why is it? Why is it? We will see three scriptures that where the covenant is mentioned in relation to Passover. Matthew 26, verse 26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the new covenant. It's a bad translation, testament. The word is diatheke. It should be properly translated as covenant. For this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins. So the new covenant, the blood is blood of Son of God, which is shed. And how that is how the covenant was sealed with his blood and ratified and brought into action, brought into life. That covenant becomes active and which is shed for many. And what is its primary purpose? Remission of sins. Remission of sins. For us to understand this verse, why he is linking new covenant with his blood in the Passover, we have to understand covenant, new covenant. In order for us to understand new covenant, we have to walk through all these covenants in the Bible. It's parallel verse, Mark 14, verse 22. I will just go read it. And as they did eat, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave to them and said, Take, eat, this is my body. And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said unto them, This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many. It is shed for many. Luke 22, verse 19, and took the bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave unto them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise, also the cup after the supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. It is shed for you, disciples. And other two verses, he said, it is shed for many. That means it is not limited to disciples. All the people subsequently that come to new covenant and partake of the Passover symbols, they're all included in this concept of the Passover and the new covenant. So with this background, we will quickly walk through the types of covenants and between man and man. This is a good category. In Genesis, starting from Genesis, we see lots of covenants, berith, occurring between man and man. Why is it? It is not random. It is not accidental. God wants us to get familiar with this thing called covenant, the berith, between man and man. Once we go through several chapters of Genesis, then he comes to the covenant that he would make. Isn't it? God gives us lots of preparation to mentally prepare for us the covenant concept. And then he begins to make a covenant, and it makes or cuts a very simple covenant first. It's almost like a skeleton covenant. And then the subsequent covenants, he adds more pieces and more pieces as we go through different covenants. And finally, the new covenant is ultimate covenant. It is enormous in its complexity. So that's how we are going. But let's see man and man, the covenant we see between two enemies. They have difficulty with one another, but they come to terms to be peaceful to each other. Here, the parties to this covenant are Abimelech, is a Philistine king, and Abraham. The bone of contention or point of contention was well. Abraham digs a well and then they come and claim this land is ours, so hence the well is ours. And they would not come and let Abraham or his servants draw water from the well, because water was a scarce resource. And then Abraham cuts a covenant with Abimelech, and this is the context, and it's a peace covenant. See, the 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 things like they have enmity against each other, but after the covenant, they have peace with each other. There's a step towards a better relationship. Genesis 21, chapter 21, verse 26. We'll start from verse 26. And Abimelech said, I wot not who has done these things, because there is an accusation. It's not Abimelech, the king himself, did object to Abraham, but some of his countrymen, some of his people are troubling Abraham. Then Abimelech comes and tells, I have no clue. I did not know what is happening. Neither did you tell me also. Neither yet I heard of it, but today. Only today I came to know about this, Abraham. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech. So it's a favor. It's a favor. He's giving these good things, sheep and oxen. Those are like your cars and houses, their possessions, and gave them to Abimelech as a goodwill gesture. And both of them made a covenant, berith, a covenant. The same word is used consistently, entire Old Testament scriptures. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs, which you have set by themselves? And Abraham said, for these 7 ewe lambs shall thou take of mine hand, that they may be a witness unto me. Here, when you enter a covenant, you also need a witness. Typically, this is put down in a document, in a scroll, that is a witness. But since they don't have a scroll or a document, there is an exchange of goods, goodwill exchange. So those would be a witness unto us that we made this covenant, making this covenant, that I have dug this well. The whole thing is point of contention is well. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba. So here, sometimes the place where they entered the covenant is also important. Here it is Beersheba. Later on, we come to mountains. One covenant was made at Mount Sinai, and other covenant was made at Mount Sion. So you have different places where the covenants are made. This is also important because they swore, both of them, both the parties entered into this agreement, this covenant, and swore. Always there is a swearing or oath or some kind of I do in the marriage covenant. Thus they made a covenant, berith, at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and Pichol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove, he planted a tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. So there's so many elements already we are seeing in a very rudimentary covenant between Abraham and Abimelech. So I'm picking only one sample for each of the category. There are lots of samples where this word berith occurs. Let's go to covenant between man and man, two enemies. Here, Abraham grows old and would die. Then Isaac takes over all his inheritance. Again, people from Abimelech would come and harass Isaac. Then Isaac makes very similar covenant again with Abimelech as Abraham did. Now, Isaac is not claiming his father's covenant with Abimelech. It won't happen because he was not party to that covenant which his father made. Now he has to make another covenant with Abimelech. That's how it works. Unless Abraham, when he made covenant with Abimelech, he can say, it is between you and me and my children. If Abraham said that, me and my children, then Isaac would automatically become part of that covenant. But he did not. He said, like, between me and you. That's why Isaac understands that he was not part or party to that earlier covenant. He makes a fresh covenant. This is the necessity. If you are not a party to a covenant, you cannot claim that covenant. Genesis verse 26, chapter 26, verse 26. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahuzat, one of his friends, and Pichol, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto them, Wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? And they said, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, Let us there be now an oath between us, betwixt is the old English word, between us, and even between us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee. So the other party, Abimelech and his people, are making a covenant with Isaac. That will do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. And he made a feast, and they did eat and drink. There is always some goodwill exchange. There's a feast. And they rose up bedtimes in the morning and swore to one another. This is kind of I do in our marriage covenant. And Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. The word covenant, berith, see, they made a covenant. So even the terms and conditions are same in the first covenant between Abraham and Abimelech, and the second covenant is also same terms and conditions, but they're two different covenants because parties are different. Remember these things. And covenant between two friends is not necessarily between two enemies. It can also be between two friends. This is the way God developing this concept of covenants. And two friends. Now, two friends, they're already friends. There is no dispute. But here the covenant is entered to strengthen their friendship, to bring them much closer and in a more covenantal way. There's a commitment to their friendship, the commitment going forward with this special relationship. That's how the covenant operates. 1 Samuel verse 18. 1 Samuel chapter 18, sorry. 1 Samuel chapter 18, we'll start with verse 1. And it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul. Now Jonathan is son of Saul, and Saul hated David. But Jonathan loved David. They are good friends. They are like soulmates. Now, in spite of Saul hating David, yet David goes ahead and makes this covenant with Jonathan. So that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. See the two friends, it's a beautiful relationship between them. And Saul took him that day and would let him go no more home to his father's house. So King Saul is putting blocks and breaks and barricades. Verse 3, then Jonathan and David made a covenant, berith, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. See here the goodwill exchange of the robes and things, a goodwill exchange. But they made a covenant. They made a covenant, berith, to strengthen their friendship, to give a name to their friendship. Sometimes a name is given to a relationship via covenant. Now we will go between man and himself. These are peculiar covenants. We don't see many examples. Here, a man made a covenant with himself. We see this in Job. Job makes this covenant. The same word berith is used. Job 31, verse 1. Job chapter 31, verse 1. I made a covenant, berith, with my eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? For what portion of God is there from above? And what inheritance of the Almighty from on high? There is a very fascinating way Job makes a covenant with himself, with his eyes. Isn't it Sermon on the Mount? He knows that whoever lusts after a woman in his heart already commits adultery. There is no question. All the people that are given Holy Spirit in the Old Testament times, they have teachings of Christ in some form or other. They knew Sermon on the Mount. It's evident. That's how they all make it into kingdom. All the patriarchs, all the holy men and women of the Old Testament. So this is one example. Man makes himself. What is the third category? This is intriguing. A man and death. We see this in Isaiah. This is what God tells them. Isaiah 28, verse 14. Wherefore, hear the word of the Lord. Ye scornful men, men of Israel, who are scornful men, that rule this people which is in Jerusalem, because ye have said, we have made a covenant, berith, same word, with death. They had agreement with death. See, the covenants with God, they are all agreement based on life. The covenants with God. Here they are going in opposite direction, making a covenant with death. And with hell, that is Sheol, we are at agreement. This is a figurative way of saying, when the overflowing scourge shall pass through, and it shall not come to us, for we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood have we hid ourselves. This is a very metaphorical way of describing their bad spiritual state at that point. Those men in Israel and Jerusalem and Judea. It's an interesting covenant between man and death, and between God and every living thing. This is Noahic covenant we will go through today, between God and every living thing, in whose nostrils is breath. And this is Noahic covenant. I'll skip this. Between God and man. This is the fifth category, is the most important category. And all the covenants in the rest of the series, we will cover only under category 5. And I have a listing of these covenants. Adamic covenant, Genesis 2 and 3, 2 chapters. It's a more like a conceptual covenant. You don't find the word berith. Abrahamic covenant, mainly chapter 15, but 12, 15, and 17 of Genesis. And you do find the word berith, covenant, with Abraham. And Davidic covenant, again, it's a more concept covenant. 2 Samuel 7, you don't find the word berith. And Sinai covenant, which is also called Old Covenant. Sinai is the place or mountain where this covenant was made. It is Exodus 19 to 31 chapters. And then Sion covenant, or sometimes some people put it as Zion with Z. Zion or Sion, same word, covenant, that is also called New Covenant. You have pretty much spread across multiple scriptures. So these are all covenants between God and man. So these we would go through one by one in our series. And then the sixth is very intriguing covenant. Very, very, very few people are aware among the Christians of this covenant. This is between God and God. What is this? This is a covenant between God the Father and God the Son, before the world was created. This is in eternity past. I will give you one scripture. Perhaps we can discuss some other point. Psalms 40, verse 6. Psalms 40, verse 6. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. Mine ears have you opened. Burnt offerings and sin offerings have you not required. Then said I, Lo, I come. In the volume of book it is written of me. I delight to do my will. O my God, yea, thy law, your law is within my heart. I have preached righteousness in the great congregation. Lo, I have not refrained my lips. O Lord, you knowest. This is the words of Christ. And in the volume of book, it is already written how he is going to come and why he is going to come and what he is going to accomplish. All of these things are written because the word book is not really book. It's a Hebrew word, sefer. The sefer is a legal document. It implies that there is a covenantal agreement entered upon between the God the Father and God the Son in eternity past. Everything, all things are planned and laid out for the salvation of mankind, redemption of man, forgiveness of sins. All these things are chalked out well ahead of time. Isn't it fascinating, this covenant between God and God? I have more to speak about that, but God willing, in future we will talk about that. So these are types of covenants. We have more specialized concepts around covenants. You have covenants of salt, and you have covenants of blood. We will talk about them later presentations. Now we will shift to Noahic covenant. Noahic covenant, this is between God and the entire mankind. We are also covered under this covenant because he said, to you, Noah, and your seed, because all of us, even though we come from different races, different countries, we all come from one man, Noah. We also come from one man, Adam, but here in the context, after the flood, all people that are left from the flood came out of the ark, and all of us, in one way or other, related to Noah. So when he makes that covenant with Noah, all of us are covered who are born after the flood. This narration begins Genesis 8, verse 20, the whole covenant, but we will go with Genesis 6 to get the background. Here is an important point you must consider. When Bible talks about the covenant, there is a legal aspect to the covenant. The exact document, exact terms and conditions, parties, and the sign, and the covenant comes into aspect, comes into life, comes into force. That is the legal aspect. That is one way to study and learn covenants. There is another way to learn the covenants. When God talks about covenants, before he makes this legal contract, or sometimes he makes this legal contract, but after several years and several generations, he looks back at this legal contract and reveals much more. He always reveals a story behind the actual contract. So the covenant is not just a contract that is agreed upon parties. There is a story, a wide story before and after. So unless you understand the whole story, you don't get the meaning and purpose of a covenant. For example, Sinai covenant, even though it is entered at Mount Sinai, and Moses and 70 elders, children of Israel, they enter into covenantal agreement at Mount Sinai with their God Yahweh. That is the pivotal point where the contract was entered. But later on, God comes and tells that is not the entire story of the covenant. Actually, the Sinai covenant, according to God's own words, would begin at Egypt when they are beginning to come out of Egypt. And he takes the story all the way to the promised land where they set their foot first time in the promised land. The whole story God puts when he explains to us the Sinai covenant. So this is very important for us, for every covenant, to understand the big picture behind the actual narrow, small contract of the covenant. So with this background, let's begin. Even though many Bible students start their discussion with Genesis 8, I want to start actually with few verses from Genesis 6. Genesis 6, verse 11, God gives the big picture. Why all this covenant? Why he's leading to the covenant, Noahic covenant. Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, the earth also was corrupt before God. The whole earth was corrupt. Every man, woman, child were corrupt. And earth was filled with violence. Now here you are dealing with a world that everybody became like Cain. You have a bunch of Cains. Man, woman, children, older people, they're full of violence. They're bloodthirsty. What happened to Cain? God judged Cain. What happens to murderers? Murderers afterwards, when we have Sinai covenant, they were beaten with stones. There's a capital punishment for murders. We see that in Noahic covenant also, God lays down that rules. Whoever kills or murders must also be killed. He makes a sentence, because blood you should not shed. The violence I would not tolerate. Now here, this is the state of affairs on the earth, and God was sorry that he made man. And God looked, verse 12, God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh has corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. It means God decided to wipe out the whole mankind. For the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So this is a decree God passed. It was not easy for God to kill and wipe out entire mankind with flood, but God of justice has to do this. Even though it broke his heart, he was sorry that he created man and mankind. And then he gives instructions to Noah, make an ark of gopher wood. So the ark instructions go on. Let's continue. And another background statement, Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. Here, even before the flood, God talks about the covenant. Isn't it interesting? The story begins here, even before the flood began. So Genesis 6, verse 17, and behold, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under the heaven, and everything that is in earth shall die. So all living creatures in whose nostrils is breath. So the breathing beings would be decimated. But with you, Noah, will I establish my covenant. Will establish, that is, after the flood, I will establish my covenant birth again. And you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and sons' wives. The family of Noah would, the only people, 8 people would survive the flood. The vengeance, the avenger of blood is the concept behind that. The avenger of blood is primarily vested with God, and God will avenge the blood of every person that is killed on the earth. Sometimes he delegates that office of the avenging of blood to human beings, to different human entities, human offices. So it's a fascinating subject. Now, God judges the whole mankind, whole earth. After the judgment, after this wiping of entire human race by the waters of flood, there we see the beginning of a new chapter, mercy, God's mercy, God's goodness, God's kindness to the 8 people that make a new beginning. And God expects to have new relationship, new mercies, and new relationship, and new promises, and a covenant comes into effect. That is the whole story. The judgment is first weightier matter of the law. Second weightier matter is mercy. God seems to follow his own weightier matters. First judgment, especially avenging of the blood and the murderers, the violence, and then he comes with his compassions and mercies. So we see the mercy here and the goodness of God when he makes this covenant. And with his goodness, with his mercy, he guarantees life. Life. I would not wipe away the whole earth again with flood. I would not wipe away entire mankind again with the waters of flood. In other words, I will make sure mankind would live life. I'm guaranteeing life. Every covenant with God for men, some kind of life is always promised. Isn't it fascinating? Let's launch into Genesis 8, verse 20, the actual text main message. Genesis 8, verse 20, and Noah built an altar unto the Lord. This is after the flood. They come out of ark, and all the mankind was wiped out. Only 8 people are living on the face of the earth, and took every clean beast and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So Noah made this offering. He built an altar and made an offering. How can he make an offering? He has to kill the animals, kill the birds, and shed the blood. Always blood comes in. Isn't it interesting? This blood does something to God. God's anger, God's wrath, God's judgment would now stops. Now stops because of the blood that is shed and the offering made on altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. When Noah offered these things, Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite anymore everything living as I have done in the flood. So this is God's response to an offering of shedding of blood on an altar. This takes us to the Sinai covenant. This takes us to the new covenant. When the blood is offered on the altar, God's judgment stops and the mercy begins. A new page in God's dealing with mankind will start. The new page is mercy, and the last previous page was judgment. Are you seeing the sequence here? Verse 22, while the earth remains, here the promise comes because of the abundance of God's mercy. As long as the earth remains, or while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease, shall not stop. He's guaranteeing the life cycle of the earth, the seasons, everything will continue. He's guaranteeing not only that flood would not come and decimate you, but all these things, your seed time and harvest time, that is for your food, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will not stop. He's guaranteeing the progression and the stability of earth for us to live peacefully. Imagine the things, if these things are taken out, how much difficult our lives would be. It's all goodness of God. Continuing, Genesis 9, chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Is it again starting the new page with 8 people? It is always a new beginning, and the whole earth is open to them. God commanded them, be fruitful and multiply, cover the whole earth, populate the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast. This is actually promised to Adam when he was created. And he's also retelling the whole thing to Noah. Now you are also making a new beginning, just like Adam did when I created him in Genesis 2. And fear of you and dread of you shall be upon every beast of earth, upon every fowl that is bird of the air, and upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Even though fishes were not part of the judgment of the flood, they survived through flood, but they were included in the dread that God is placing upon them for the man. Into your hand they are delivered. So the dominion which he gave to Adam is also restoring same dominion to Noah and his sons, actually to his seed. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Even as green herb have I given you all things. So now you can kill animals and eat them. They can be food for you. You are permitted to kill animals, birds, and fish, but you are not permitted to kill man. We'll see that why. Because after all, he wiped out entire mankind through flood because of the violence, because of the murder and shedding of blood. So don't kill man. He is upfront uh, in his commandment kind of thing. Upfront, don't kill man. You can kill all other things and you can eat them, but don't kill a man because he is created in the image of God. Other creatures are not created in the image of God. So killing of them, eating of them is permitted. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. This additional condition when you can eat all the animals, birds, but you cannot eat the blood of it, either liquid form, drink it, or the solid form, eat it. Because blood is used as a life, and blood is used to ratify the covenants later on. So you cannot eat blood or drink it. And surely, verse 5, the blood of your lives will I require. What does it mean? I will not tolerate murder. I will require judgment on whoever murders. At the hand of every beast will I require it. If a beast kills a man, that beast has to be killed. And at the hand of man. So if a man kills another man, that murderer must be killed. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. So he's instituting the penalties. Unlike Cain, who was let go, now he has to be killed. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Continuing Genesis 9, verse 16. Whoso sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. Why all this? Why all these prohibitions against murdering? Because man, its essence, is much more value. No man has a right to take the life of another human being because all of them are created in the image of God. Perhaps it is an attempt to murder God. Since you can't reach God, you are killing your fellow human being. And you be ye fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply therein. Isn't it what he is provisioning? The seed time and harvest time, and summer and winter. You need all these things for crops and the sustenance. Day and night, he's provisioning that all these things would continue in their patterns, in their cycles. So be fruitful and multiply. So what all he is commanding have interdependencies among what he is saying. And God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, saying, he's talking to the whole family. And I behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. This is again berith. He's making a berith. This is the first occurrence of berith for a covenant between God and mankind. So he's making this covenant with you and with your seed after you. This is important. Who are the parties to the covenant? Noah and all his descendants, not just his immediate sons, all his future descendants, including us, you and me, everybody in this Zoom room, are the seed of Noah. So this covenant applies to us. Verse 10, with every living creature that is in you, of the fowl that is bird, and of the cattle that is the domesticated animals, and of every beast of the earth that is wild animals, and with you, with man. There are four categories of creatures that are part of this covenant, are parties to the covenant: mankind, cattle, beasts, and the birds. We have four categories. This is very important for you to know. God is on one side, the other side, the four categories. Boom, the covenant is made. From all that go out of the ark, so whoever have come out of the ark, whoever have come out of the flood waters of judgment, the remaining people, the remnant, God is making covenant with them, every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, the berith. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood. Neither shall there be any more be a flood to destroy the whole earth. We have floods in Houston a couple of years ago. Some lost their lives. He's not saying the flood waters would not touch any human being. What he is saying here, the entire mankind I will not wipe out with floods. That promise remains standing. Verse 12, and God said, this is the token of the covenant, berith, which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for a perpetual generations. So he has a token of the covenant or a sign of the covenant. In the Sinai covenant, we have the token as circumcision of flesh. In New Covenant, Sion Covenant, we have circumcision of heart. So every covenant seems to have some sign or token. Here he gives token, very interesting. I do set my bow in the cloud. This is understood as a rainbow. And it shall be for a token of the covenant between me and the earth. And here we have nothing to do. There are no terms and conditions that require us to do anything. It is completely coming from God. Out of his own goodness, out of his own mercy, he's promising and making this covenant with all of us. And he has to do all the responsibility of this covenant is shouldered on God. God is responsible to upkeep the covenant because he's promising, I will not wipe out entire mankind with flood. So whenever you see the rainbow, you have nothing to do. But when you see, I remember of this covenant that I will not wipe out all of you by flood. Isn't it interesting, the terminology? Let's continue, verse 14. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. Who is seeing the bow? Us. And then what happens? Then I will remember my covenant. God will remember his covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. So all flesh would not be destroyed. Some would be destroyed in Houston and other places when it floods crazy. Verse 16, and the bow that is a rainbow shall be in the cloud, and when I look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting Olam covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon earth. The everlasting is not in absolute sense everlasting, but as long as the earth exists, that is the meaning, aulam. So as long as these physical flesh and blood beings exist on this earth, this covenant would be upholding. Here, what he is promising is there will not be anymore a global flood that will wipe out human beings. But that does not mean he can wipe out all human beings by fire, because that is the next judgment, universal judgment, would be fire. The whole earth would be cleansed by a huge fire, and it will melt everything and leave nothing, no trace of the things that man has accomplished. All the physical things that man accomplished, they are going to be wasted. They will disappear in the flames of fire. So that he is not saying that he will not do. Verse 17, God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh that is upon the earth. So here is a big chart. The parties to the covenant: God, mankind, cattle, beast, and birds. Now, for example, the angels cannot come and say we are part of the covenant, because I don't see angels here. You have to be part of the covenant. And terms and conditions are none from man's point of view. Benefits: no worldwide flood or deluge. Penalties and curses: none in this covenant. This is a skeleton covenant, and the blood, the burnt offering on altar, a sweet savor. Judgment stopped and mercy began. Sign of the covenant rainbow. There are additional items that get associated with this covenant, even though they're not technically part of the covenant, but they somehow associated. Seasons would continue on earth. All other creatures would fear man. All moving things given as food, sorry, it is F, food to the man. Green herb is also given as food. Be fruitful and multiply, cover the earth. Requires blood avenged on murderers. Man created in the image of God. These are two tied up. Prohibition against murder, and the man created in the image of God, and you must not eat blood. I want to say one important closing comment here. Now, man, cattle, beasts, and birds, these are the four categories God makes this covenant. The king of man is man, the king of cattle is calf, king of beasts, the wild beast, is lion, and king of birds is eagle. If you take these things, these four are kings of each of the categories. All these kings, if you take, they are like four faces. Faces of cherubim. Isn't it fascinating? This is how cherubim get associated with the covenant. That's a subject for another day. So we'll stop share and open the room for discussion. Control back to Don Wales. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, this is the portion of our evening where we can ask questions. Crystal's iPad.
What do you think is the first covenant that we can find in the Bible? From my understanding, it's Genesis 1:14, and in that he declares that he is going to make again a covenant with mankind as the holy days. So the feast, I find, is his very first covenant, because these are appointed times that he's going to save mankind. If he didn't intervene in mankind's history as laid out in the holy days, there would be no salvation. And that's where I take the covenant back to. I'd like to hear what others think. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with you, Phil. It's more a conceptual covenant. That is first Adamic covenant. But the word berith is used first time in Noahic covenant. That's why I'm calling it as it's a more formal way of putting the word berith, Genesis 9. But if you see conceptually some other place, I'm totally in agreement. I have no objection to that. I'm done.
Any other questions about the presentation? Topic of the presentation? The burning bonfire in Eau Claire. I'm assuming that's Tom Cress's.
Yeah, sure it is.
Okay.
And I just had a comment on when you said when the covenant was completed between men, they would take it and nail it on the wall, and there was a hole left in there, and it reminded me of the deck of cards that my nephew had on his table, and when they finished playing with the cards and in a casino, they would drill a hole through it, and then you could take those cards, and they were completed for any use that could be in the casino at that time. So I was just wondering if that had something to do with the same hole that was put in the covenants. It was finished. It was complete. It was done. Just a thought. I have no idea.
Tom, that's perhaps the continuation of the ancient practice where they would nail the document, nail it. The contract is nailed. So that is done, that is closed, no longer operative. Perhaps I see that, but others can give their insight. Thank you.
Robin?
So, what is the deeper significance of the shedding of blood for God's anger to be appeased? Like, I mean, I get it's a substitute for our, it's our sin, it should be our blood. But it seems like when I think about it, it seems like there's got to be more to it, and I'm not really comprehending. Like, David in one of the Psalms just says, well, blessed is the man to whom God does not impute sin. Well, that was well before there was a savior. So I just feel like there's more to it, and I would like some input on that.
Can I give my input and then we will ask the Robin, very good question. Excellent question. Here, God is building these covenants step-by-step fashion, and they're kind of shadow of something bigger and greater that would eventually come. So these are echoes of something that would be yet a bigger future event. You and I know this shedding of blood is shedding of blood of Son of God. When it happens, that pleases God, and the whole mankind is under the wrath of God, under the judgment. It is decreed that we all should be decimated in the lake of fire because all have sinned. And that is the decree, underlying assumption. When Son of God with sinless life and laid down his life, shed his blood, and offered it kind of an altar to God the Father, that appeased, that pleased. God was satisfied because all the requirements of justice for all of our sins is fully met. And then the chapter of judgment is done, and the new page of grace and goodwill. All this new page has started with the new covenant. For that to explain to us, you need all these shadows, all these echoes of that. But otherwise, in just a ritual thing, if you offer a bird and its blood and a cattle and some animal, how would it please God? How would it be like a sweet savor to him? It doesn't make sense if you take this in isolation. That's my 2 cents. But if others have greater insight, Robin would surely appreciate, and I would also be greatly appreciating, because it's not my solo thing. It's all of us collectively responsible. I'm done.
Crystal's iPad?
I want to echo back to the first covenant. The reason I pick it on the holy days is because Passover is one of those, and that's part of our discussion tonight. And he said he sacrificed the Passover lamb. The decision was made before the foundations of the world. It was pre-Adamic, before man was there, in Genesis 1:14. Later on, he swears by it. He says his covenant is everlasting, and is established as the sun and the moon. They can't be changed by people. There's nothing any human being can do to modify it. So if you take Passover as the penultimate covenant, the real thing, the foundations of the world happened after that decision was made. And again, we're talking in linear time and not the way he thinks of things. He can think of the things that are from the end, from the beginning. So, because he's got the power to do that. So that's my 2 cents. Is the Passover was actually the penultimate covenant, the blood sacrifice of Yeshua. And it was pre-planned from the beginning. Thank you.
Robin?
Okay, just kind of a follow-up question. So, well, first, just a quick comment that occurred to me, that when you said that all men are under God's wrath and deserve the lake of fire, that's kind of funny that he uses the term lake, because that's also, we think of that as water, but he said he wouldn't flood again. He wouldn't destroy with water again, but he will with fire, but he's still going to call it a lake, which I think is funny. Although I'm sure it's molten fire, so it's whatever. Anyway, that's kind of a side point. Okay, so judgment, mercy, and faith, and the blood is what satisfies God's judgment. And then is it an automatic, like we know that some people are still under judgment. So what is the process from going to go from under judgment to under mercy? And why is faith last? It seems like it should be judgment and then faith and then mercy.
This is a general pattern, general rule, general sequence of things: judgment first and then mercy. But you don't see any conditions in the first Noahic covenant, Robin. But as you progress towards next components, next covenants, Abrahamic covenant, still largely unconditional. There are few conditions. When you come to Sinai covenant, more conditions are added. And when you come to new covenant, a lot more conditions are added. So even though God sent forth his son, this is John 16, so that the world may not perish. The whole world, the Greek cosmos, is now under context when we come to new covenant. He doesn't want anybody in the cosmos to perish, but all may come to life. Whosoever believes in my son. So that is an open-ended statement, but that is not realized for every man, woman, child on the earth down through the ages, because they're simply not called, not open. So there seem to be timetable, but when all this timetable is executed, when you come to that statement that the mercy has reached everybody, but some have choice of rejecting mercy and stay with judgment. That's another concept, that even though intended purpose is mercy for all, but people can reject mercy. That's where the danger of unpardonable sin and all categories of sins. But others, please come in and throw your insight, please. I'm done.
Rod?
No,
What was
I've been
wrong?
thinking about the
Mike,
covenants
Mhm.
and vowing. What's the difference between a covenant and vowing? To me, it seems to me that the covenant is sort of a plural vow. And the best example I can think of a vow is Hannah. Hannah is barren. She makes a vow, and she gives birth to Samuel. But she has to give him up. That's part of the vow, that she'll give up Samuel. Maybe there's some Paul makes a vow in the New Testament times. But it's interesting. I was reading about vows, and Josiah makes a vow with the Lord. And it seems to me that vows, if that may have been the thing that caused them to be carried off, because they didn't keep their vows. Everyone vowed to do everything the Lord has says, because it says about vows, and thinking of vows as covenants, is that if you don't keep your vow, God loses interest in you. So I'm wondering if that can't be thought of. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So, Rod, this is whole part paradigm. There's a whole thing that has parts. So, covenant is the whole thing, and the vow is a part. Every covenant has some kind of vow behind it, but every vow need not be a covenant. Covenant is much bigger and it has more complexity than a simple vow. Vow is binding on the person who made that vow. But covenant is also binding on all the parties. But covenant has terms and conditions, a documental laying down of the terms and conditions. There's a blood that ratifies the covenant, and the and penalties for violation, and the benefits of remaining faithful to the covenant. All these things are there in addition to just a vow. I think at least that would help you to think, uh, uh, develop your own understanding. But fundamentally, bigger thing is covenant, and a smaller unit of a covenant is a vow. Can we call every vow as covenant? I don't think so. It's my opinion. But every covenant, can you say it's like a vow? Of course, yes. I tend to agree with that. I'm done.
It's my understanding that covenants are common in archaeology. They find them all over the Middle East. And the language of the Bible is like those covenants. A lot of times, when a kingdom fell to another king, they made a covenant with him because he had a going system there. You know, he just said he wanted to receive so much silver every year, and you know, and would worship the same gods or something like that. I think that's interesting.
Crystal's iPad?
So you started out with the Noahic covenant and how it was almost basically one-sided. It was Yahweh intervening with mankind so that mankind's survival would be ensured and the wickedness wouldn't overtake and destroy everything. John 3:16 basically says the same thing. And one of the interesting things that Herb Slinsky showed me, he took it, he was a Jew, grew up as a Jew, lived as a Jew, and became interested. He said if Yeshua was really the Son of God, he should be able to find it in the Old Testament only, without any help or any predictions from the New Testament. He should be able to find it and find that he was. In fact, that's what he did. It took him several years, but he's got a study that he produced out of it. And one of the pieces of linking terms is right arm or right hand. It's interesting that all the way through the Old Testament, Yahweh's talking to himself, and he says, I can't find any person to save humanity. So he spoke to his own right arm, and his own right arm became salvation. Again, you can see that in all the way through the Psalms. Isaiah 62, verse 8, the Lord swore by his own right hand and by his own mighty arm, never again I give your grain to your enemy, or your food will be foreigners' drink, and new wine you have toiled. That's just one place that he's talking about his right arm. He does it many times in like Psalms 89, verse 13. Mighty is your right arm, strong is your right hand. Your right hand is exalted. Psalms 98, verse 1. Sing to the Lord a new song, for wonders he has done, his right arm and his holy arm. It's really interesting. It seems like it's John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. Again, that's Passover. It seems like it's a covenant, but it's a creation covenant. All of creation's a covenant. He's giving us something that we can't get. And that's a one-sided covenant, but that's what he chose to do. So it's a very interesting concept. I wonder if you've thought about the concept of his right arm being covenant. Thank you.
Fascinating story.
Marlene?
I was looking at the concept of the bloodshed. When you look at the whole purpose of what the Father and Christ did, all this stuff going on revolves around love. This was their whole drive and the whole purpose. You had man that sinned, and you love them so much. And what is required, what is needed in order to take away that sin and reestablish a relationship with them again. So you look at Christ, who has life. He's the only human that was born that had life. All of the rest of us being born, we were dead spiritually. since Adam and Eve. The day they did that, they died spiritually, and every human being was born dead, basically. But Christ was born and he had life in him. He is life, he's the resurrection. And then he gives his life, which is the blood of his life. The blood of the human body is the life. And he gives that life. So in turn, we could have eternal life. I just find it interesting, this whole circle of what he's doing and how he does things. And then tying in with the covenant and the blood that's required with that. It just seems there's a lot of pieces here that just come together with the blood.
Any other comments?
Yeah, certainly the Moses, the covenant with Moses is finalized with blood in Exodus, I think 25 or so.
Igor?
The overall paradigm of blood, as we discussed today, we see the same pattern all through the covenants. There is a big impending judgment, and then the blood somehow appeases or somehow concludes the judgment phase, and or at least stops judgment, and then initiates a new page of mercy. And we see this more and more in different layers and different aspects. Passover, that's how we began. We want to understand Passover. Now, if you take the first Passover, where Passover lambs are slain, what is the concept? The impending judgment is everybody in Egypt would be decimated by death angel. There's a widespread, it is like a flood. It's an avenger of death, avenger of blood. There's an agencies of God's judgment bringing death upon people. And when that agency comes, there is no discrimination. It just sweeps and wipes. But there should be a provision to stop that judgment from touching us, or at least we are spared from that judgment. Like Noah and his sons and his family were stopped by the ark. Here, if you take the Passover, first Passover, all the Israelites would have perished, all the firstborn. That's another interesting sub-story within the main story. The sub-story is death of firstborn. All the firstborn are going to die. That is the decree from God, either Egyptians or Israelites. But only exception is blood on the doorposts and the lintels. And you are introduced with the lamb, the animal lamb. And when the death angel sees the lamb, he wouldn't touch that house. And all the firstborn in that house are not touched, saved by this widespread impending judgment. So that's how the blood stops. Blood saves, blood protects, blood hides from this impending death. So all the firstborn are declared to die, decreed to die. That's one preliminary. It's kind of echo of something bigger that's going to come. And we realize the importance of all these things in their full sense only when we come to New Covenant. When we come to New Covenant, all the people on the earth, every human being is decreed to die. Second death. So somehow it has to be stopped. Then the Lamb of God is introduced instead of lamb. And then all the firstborn would die, but only those who are born again, second born from above, born of spirit, born of water, would not be touched by this second death, lake of fire. That is we are talking about the fire, lake of fire that cleanses the whole earth. So if you want to survive, you need Lamb of God, and you should stop to be firstborn. You have to be born again. I think I spoke enough. Just something to think about. I'm done.